Hi everybody and welcome to this week's episode of Gaffer and Gear. Today we're going to be looking at the TGL brand of lights and in particular this Lukas 200S. Now this light isn't particularly feature rich, so it doesn't have an RGB mode, it doesn't have a gels library, it doesn't have cop car effects lights or things like that. But if you're after a super easy to use bicolor light that just chucks on a stand, plugs into one power cable, turns on and has presets and has a heap of firepower, then this unit is probably for you. Now, as I said in the intro, the 200S isn't feature rich. It doesn't have a whole stack of fancy effects and gels libraries. If you're someone who just wants to put a light on a stand, here's the big advantage of this system. You literally just take the light out of the box, stick it on the light stand, no transformers to plug in, no controllers, one power cable, flick the on switch and you're ready to go. Really is as simple as that. Now let's have a look at the controls. Okay, so you've got your color control here, which changes in 50 Kelvin increments. It goes from 2,800 degrees Kelvin right up to 6,000 degrees Kelvin. You've got some quick presets. So your most common ones you're going to use are 3,200 degrees Kelvin and 5,600 degrees Kelvin. And you've got your dimmer knob. Okay, so the dimmer goes in 1% increments. However, if you want to go faster, you press it down and now it skips in 5% increments. So that's it. It really is that simple to use. No navigating menus, no trying to figure out how to do a factory reset because you can't figure out how to get back to a basic operating page. That's it. Nice, simple, old school. Now, TGL's been around for quite a bit of time. So I bought my first TGL lights, 200s, about 6 years ago. Now, if you looked at them 6 years ago, they might be worth looking at again because the color accuracy has improved out of sight. So when you dial in a color temperature on these, it is accurate to typically, and this is using my measurements, 26 degrees Kelvin. So I took with my color spectrometer a reading at 200 increments all the way through the color range, and 26 degrees Kelvin is the average accuracy. So it's out by 26 degrees Kelvin on average. Now to compare that to most bicolor lights, they're usually accurate. A good one that's expensive and costs more than this would be accurate to about 300 degrees Kelvin. So a lot of work's gone into making these accurate. The color rendering is also incredibly high. We'll talk about that later in the video. Now the other thing I do like with these units is the front. The front has a perspex already built into it. So you don't need to clip a gel to the front to get rid of those multiple shadows or multiple reflections in the eyes. Now all up, I've probably owned about 15 TGL lights. When a new one comes in, I tend to sell off the old ones and upgrade. I'm a bit of a loyal customer that way with them. But one thing I've always liked with them is the lock-offs. The lock-offs, they always stay where you lock them. This unit has 2 lock-offs. The lock-offs are so good, in fact, they could probably get away with just having one, but having the 2 of them is great if you've got a heavy accessory on the front. Another thing that's great with the lock-offs is if you've got a light modifier on the front and you operate your light tilted a lot, quite often the light modifier will hit the stirrup here and you can't tilt it. But if you own one of these, you can personalize where the stirrup or where the bail mounts to the light. So you can undo the screws here and adjust where it sits. So that's a handy little bit of customization that you can do when you own your own lights. The other thing I like with these is these rods on the back. They're great handles for getting the unit on and off the stand very, very easily. They also offer some protection. If you've got it in a soft bag, they offer some protection for your buttons and your switches. Another thing that's really well thought out with these is there is loads of rigging and mounting points. So if you're putting it into a lighting grid or something like that, you're not shy of anywhere that you can mount a safety chain or a safety rope to. Now, one thing that's been a huge advantage with these TGLs for me is when I'm working in the rain. Because there's no cooling fans anywhere on this, I can literally just chuck a clear bag over the top of it to keep it out of the weather, and it'll run perfectly fine. Now, the units do have DMX. So the DMX is really simple to program. So you just hit your DMX address, and you've got a choice. You can set your DMX address for your CCT, which is your color temperature. You can also set it for your brightness. Now look at how easy this is. One knob adjusts one option, and the other knob adjusts the other option. Okay, so it's really straightforward to set. Now, one thing I like about this unit is when you plug the DMX in, it actually tells you on the display what's going on. So I'll just plug this in. Okay, so it's now detected a DMX 512 signal, and it's telling me that the light's set to 2,800 degrees Kelvin with a zero dimmer. Most lights, when you set them to DMX, you've got no idea what's going on. But the advantage to this is you can now, if you've got some tape and a pen, you can mark up the color temperature on your slider. So I'll just get some brightness into here. Okay, so up there it's 6,000 degrees Kelvin. So let's say we want 5,600. We can mark on the slider where it is because we know exactly what's going on the display. And as I said earlier, the color temperature is very, very accurate. Now, one last thing quickly to mention with the DMX. I was doing a shoot in one of the TV stations here in Melbourne, and they've actually got some of these in their lighting grid, and I was quite surprised to see them because not many people have heard of TGL. And I asked their lighting guy why they picked the TGLs. And what he said was the dimmer response on the DMX. So it can be dimmed up and it can be dimmed down without any flicker at all. So most LED lights cannot do that. So that's something that's worth pointing out. Now, the Lukas 200 does have a 48 volt DC inlet. So one of the first things I did when I got one of these was I got a 48 volt battery system made up, plugged it in and blew it up. So that's not going to work. Don't make a 48 volt battery and stick it into there. But what you can do, what works perfectly fine, is make up an adapter plug that goes to 3 D-tap connectors, and you can run this system off 3 V-Lock batteries. In fact, using 260 watt-hour batteries, you can run this light for 2 3/4 hours. Okay, so up to this point I've been pretty positive. Let's talk about the negatives. And the only real negatives I've got with this is the way accessories mount onto the front, such as barn doors or their honeycombs or their crates. And they screw in, so there's 4 screws here. By the time you screw them in, it's painstakingly slow. By the time you screw them in, the chute's over. So I think they might have fixed that up. I think they might have, you might be able to get an accessory that screws on the front and you can drop accessories in now. I think that's something they've come up with recently. I'm not 100% certain on that. But that's my only sort of negative thing with it. Now, in fact, I don't actually buy any of their barn doors or their crates. I use snap grids. So DOP Choice now makes snap grids and accessories for the TGL Lukas family. So that's the only negative I've got, and it's not really that big a deal. You can buy other accessories anyway. So look, in summary, if you're just after a bicolor light that has a lot of punch, then this is well worth a look at. And speaking in terms of how much punch it has, well, I did an old school shootout, so I compared this to the RE SkyPanel S30 and the RE SkyPanel S60, and here are the results. Now, all of these readings were taken at 3 meters with the lights set to 5,600 degrees Kelvin. Now, the SkyPanels had their standard diffusions in them. The TGL came in at 951 lux. The SkyPanel S30C came in at 831 lux. Now, the SkyPanel S30 and the TGL 200 are both 200 watt lights. That's what the 200 means. So the TGL actually came in at 14% brighter than the RE SkyPanel watt for watt. But how did it go against the S60? Now, the S60 came in at 1,569 lux, which makes the TGL 60% the brightness of a SkyPanel S60. So as far as 200 watt lights go, this is super powerful. And as I mentioned earlier, it dials in its color temperatures with amazing accuracy. So how does it go in terms of color rendering? Well, looking at TLCI scores, its lowest score was 97.6. Its highest score was 98.7, and right across its range, its average score was 98.3. Now, I just want to point out here, I am not one of those reviewers who reads the stats on the back of the box. I actually took these readings for myself at 200 Kelvin increments with my own color spectrometer. Okay, so let's see how this thing went in terms of TM30 color vector testing. Its highest score was 95.7%, and that was right down the very bottom at the warm end. Its lowest score was 91.9%, and that was at the very top end at 6000 degrees Kelvin. Its overall score was 93.1, which is a very respectable TM30 score. Its color saturation scores right across the range was 102.1% on average, which means your colors will be as rich as they should be. Now, a lot of people that hire this off me want it because they love the skin tones when they're filming close-ups. They just love the way it looks. Now that brings me to my next point. How does this thing generate pure whites? Well, it has a slight pink hue right across its entire operating range, which is why the skin tones look so good. In fact, if you want to neutralize that skin tone out, you'd need to put a 1/4 plus green. Now, for those people who are really into their stats, I took a bit more detailed readings at 3200 degrees Kelvin, 4300 degrees Kelvin, and 5600 degrees Kelvin, because these are our common usage kelvins. Okay, so at 3200 degrees Kelvin, this is the TM30. At 3200 degrees Kelvin, this is the spectrum. Here are the CRI results. As I mentioned earlier, these lights have a pink hue. This is where it's mapping against the black body curve. Now here are the TM30 results for 4300 degrees Kelvin. Here is the color spectrum for 4300 degrees Kelvin. And here are the CRI results. And this is where it's mapping against the Planckian curve. These are the TM30 results for 5600 degrees Kelvin. Here's the spectrum at 5600. And these are the CRI scores. This is where it's mapping against the black body curve. I'm Andrew Locke. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Gaffer and Gear. See you on the next one.